Tonight, our guest is the ever-present George Steinmetz, and I'm thrilled that he's agreed to open this program. It's been since the late 70s that George has been traveling throughout the world, helping us see places that we wouldn't otherwise see in new and absolutely exciting ways. It's his love of Africa, the desert landscape, that has resulted in some 15 plus years of photographing all those remote landscapes in a truly unique perspective. I think it's safe to say equal parts advocate, adventurer, and witness. George's dedication defines what it means to explore and to see with eyes wide open, and to communicate it to people like us who can't be there. Great pleasure to welcome George to ICP. George.
It's quite an honor to be here. It's kind of heavy for me tonight because I have friends here from my high school and my college, and my wife is here over there, and my publisher, so I have to be careful. No, it's really, I'm really flattered to have you all here tonight. Tonight I wanted to share with you my own personal journey. It's one that's taken me to every continent for the past 15 years to fly over virtually every patch of sand on Earth. And it started for me when I was in Stanford. I was in my third year, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I grew up in Beverly Hills. Don't hold it against me. I grew up there. And I wanted to kind of get away from that. I went to Africa because I wanted to discover kind of a different reality. And I decided to, after my third year, I was studying geophysics, and because it was the highest paying major at the time, I was just trying to back up as my plan B, but I didn't really know what plan A was. And so I went on a long hitchhiking trip, and I thought my mother was going to have a heart attack when I told her I was dropping out of Stanford to go hitchhiking in Africa. And this is me leaving my mother's house. That's my best friend at the time, Kurt Holzinger, with our backpacks. And we bought one-way tickets to London, and we started hitchhiking through Europe and then to North Africa. And then Kurt, he and I split up in Algeria, and he lent me his camera with some rudimentary instructions on how to use it. And so I headed off across the Sahara alone. I took the bus to the edge of Algiers and put out my thumb. And I didn't know any French or Arabic. I didn't really know what the hell I was doing. And this is in Cameroon after I got across the Sahara. And in Africa, I fell in love with traditional cultures, and I tried to seek out the most traditional peoples I could find. This is in the Mandra Mountains of Cameroon, and I spent 4 or 5 days in one of those little huts there, and I documented how they built their huts, how they're preparing their fields for the harvest. And I became fascinated with documenting the most ancient forms of Africa that still persisted at the time. And this is in the nearby marketplace. Africa today is very different from what it was then. I mean, there were no cell phones have been revolutionary. There's been a lot of development, and a lot of governments have changed. But back then, it was I was kind of I'd run into any Americans, and there were very few people doing what I was doing. I was really out on my own. This is I had to hitchhike across Zaire, which is now Congo, and I was going through. I was riding on backs of trucks because I didn't have any money for rides. I developed these 3 basic rules of hitchhiking, which was never pay for a ride and drink any water that comes out of a pipe. And then I learned how to arrive in a village and walk around looking kind of friendly and stupid, so people would take me into their hut for the night. And that's what I did in this village. And then I ended up having to walk for about a week because there wasn't another truck for a week, and I met this pygmy who was going out hunting in the morning, and I started smoking cigarettes as a way to make friends with the locals, and I gave him a cigarette so I could take his portrait. And as I traveled, I started having fewer and fewer possessions. My pants fell apart, my shoes fell apart. I got this is me. My mom sent me care package, sent me a pair of Levi's, and I was into clove cigarettes. She sent me a carton of clove cigarettes once every couple months. And this is me in the back of a pickup truck in Zaire. And because I wasn't paying for a ride, they gave me the worst seat in the truck, which is on the bumper. And when you're sitting back there on a hot day, all the sand, all the dust boils off the back tire, and I got covered in dust. But I didn't really know what I was doing, but I started to imagine that I was a National Geographic photographer. And so I heard that there was a revolutionary movement in the mountains of Uganda, and I sought out the revolutionary leader, who was a guy in the cream-colored suit. And I think that's one of his second wife on the right, holding the briefcase, and then his cousins are probably holding the guns in the background, but that's his personal guard. And he was addressing members of the international press, which unfortunately for him was only me. And then I started, finally, even with $5,000 for a year, eventually I started running out of money with my hitchhiking techniques. And this is, so I had to head north, and this is going across Sudan. And it was the rainy season, so the roads were all washed out. But the best way to get across was on the train, but the train was, I was a cheapskate, so I rode on top. It was free, and you had a great view. But the problem was there was no toilet. And when you had to go, you had about 5,000 people wanting to see how Whitey did and cheering me on. So. And to take pictures in Sudan, I had to get this permit, which I've kept to this day. It's a wonderful thing because it says I'm forbidden from photographing nude persons. And at that time, about 2/3 of the people in South Sudan didn't have any clothes. And they, of course, are the people I wanted to photograph. And so I spent about a week in this little a cattle camp on the banks of the Nile. And the fire you see in the middle, it's they get all the cattle dung together in the morning after the cows go out to graze, and they burn it to keep the camp clean and keep the bugs down, and then they smear the ash on themselves. And this is a father teaching his son how to braid a cow's tether. But it was a very, very ancient, pure form of Africa, which is what I had really come to document. And this is a collage from my various travels in Africa and postcards I sent to my parents. It was every month or so I'd be in an African capital, and I'd mail home like a little box of films to my mother, and she would send me these notes like, you know, frame 37 roll 2 is out of focus. But that was 3 months ago. But she told me I had great talent, but you can't always believe your mother. Anyway, so I got back from my travels, and I went back to Stanford and graduated, went back to Africa again for another 1.5 years of trying to be a photojournalist. And then I came back to San Francisco, and I tried to make a living, and it was not so easy. And so I started doing self-portraits of myself to send to photographers trying to get jobs. This is the photo assistant, the preppy photo assistant. And after about a year of trying to get jobs, I started to get jobs from local magazines. And at the time, there was this newfangled thing called the computer, the personal computer, and it was really very exciting. And this is the mayor of San Francisco at the time, Dianne Feinstein. She didn't know how to work a computer, but it sure looked nice on her desk. And so I started getting day jobs photographing computer technology in Silicon Valley. And this is Steve Jobs right after he bought a little company called Pixar. Isn't it amazing? Look at those computers, man. And eventually, I was able to get a job from National Geographic. I talked them into a story about oil exploration, which is basically what I had studied in my Plan B at Stanford, geophysics. And this was an oil rig testing in the North Sea. And I went, they gave me it was a great gig. I spent 1.5 years going all over the world photographing how oil was found. And this is in New Guinea. Back then, they didn't have GPS, and the helicopters in New Guinea were following the rivers for navigation. And this is up in Alaska. To go out, I was on a drill ship that got frozen in by sea ice off the north coast of Alaska, and they had to have an Eskimo with us to ward off the polar bears, because the polar bears would actually kill the crews that were testing the ice to see if the ship was going to get crushed. But what I really wanted to do was to get back to Africa. And after about 10 years of working for the Geographic, I talked him into a gig to do a big portfolio about the Earth as we were approaching the new millennium, the second millennium. And they sent me to, the first place I went was to West Africa, and this is the coast of Mauritania. And I started taking aerial photographs. When I was a young guy hitchhiking, I had this, I felt like I was an ant crawling across the carpet of Africa, and I thought, geez, if I could just get up and I could see that shag rug a little bit better, I could really get some interesting pictures. And so this is the capital of Mauritania, and they had a terrible drought there, and most of the people in the country lost their livestock, so they've all migrated to the capital and live in this kind of the shanty town in the dunes. About 2/3 of the country lives in the capital now. And I basically am fascinated with the patterns. I could see stuff from the air that I just could never imagine on the ground. And I started working out of small planes. And planes are terrific, but they're somewhat limited. You're flying at about 100 miles an hour, and it's always difficult to communicate to the pilot exactly where you want to be. And out in the Sahara, there's not a whole lot of places to land or places to get fuel. And so to go out there, we had to carry all the fuel in the back of the plane. It was just me and the pilot, and we stuffed the whole back full of plastic jerry cans, and then we'd land and refuel. And we could do that for maybe 1 or 2 refuelings, and then we had to go back to the capital. This is a small caravan crossing the Sahara. So when I was out there, I heard about this, this crazy kind of flying called motorized paragliding. And this is, so I bought one. And it's kind of, this is what I fly today. It's kind of like a big leaf blower. And the wing is it's a paraglider wing, like a parachute. And you lay it out like a kite in the ground, and you run to take off and land. And it can fly about 30 miles an hour. And it opened me up to a new way of seeing. And so I talked the Geographic into doing a story on the Central Sahara, basically retracing my steps as a hitchhiker. And I found that I could get pictures in ways that I never could have imagined before. These are 2 salt caravans passing each other out in the middle of the Sahara. And you know, if you had a helicopter, there were no helicopters in Niger, but if you had a helicopter, you'd have all this downwash, and the camels would flee, and there was no fuel out there. It'd be impossible. But with the paraglider, we threw it in the back of the car, and I could get just amazing pictures that you couldn't do. It was kind of like, I mean, for me, it was kind of like now everybody's all excited about drones, but to me, this was like I was the drone. And you could take pictures out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. I mean, I took off just before sunrise and told the cars to head south, and this is them going across a plain it was a 12-hour drive to get across this plain. It's an old lake bed of the Sahara. And another wonderful thing about the paraglider is you can, I spent the night in the hut with this lady in the red dress, and I went out with her in the morning when she was collecting salt, and then I thought, oh, the light's getting high enough, it might be good for a flight now. So I went back and I could get aerial photos and ground photos at the same day and the same time. It's really extraordinary. So I put together a little compilation of what my little aircraft can do, a little video compilation so you can see takeoff and landing. So I was really amazed by what I could do with this crazy little machine. It opened me up to new ways of seeing and new ways of exploring. And for example, like on an old French map, I saw this this crater, this volcanic crater on the upper left. It's about probably 12 kilometers in diameter, and we camped about there. And to get up, and I wanted to get a view of the whole thing, and so I took off before sunrise, and I went full power until I ran out of gas, and this is the view I had. This is about 5,000 feet above takeoff, and this is with a fisheye lens. But you couldn't, I mean, even with the helicopter, you couldn't take a picture this wide without getting the skids or the blades in it. But with my little rig, I've got a 180-degree view, clear in both horizontal and vertical dimensions. It's really like a flying lawn chair. I was quite enamored. It's also found that it was really wonderful in deserts because we could take off and land almost anywhere. We were flying, this is my friend Francois who taught me how to fly on the ground in the red jacket. And we were flying in this remote part of Niger, and we found these little lumps of stones, and we landed and investigated. There were pre-Islamic graves that had never been opened. Francois, of course, being the bad Frenchman, he had to go and open one up. He didn't take anything, he just wanted to peek inside. But no one had ever been there before. No one even knew they existed. And then we could take back off before it got too hot and land back at the cars and have breakfast. And it was just the ultimate exploration tool. The locals didn't know quite what to make of us. The old guy said, they want to die, but God has not chosen their time. But the kids thought it was great fun. We were kind of like the town clowns for the day. And we could go and explore places. This is an area of Chad that nobody had been into for about 10 years because of the area, the access to it was mine, and we got in there, and I flew like 4 days in a row here. I never left a track, and you could fly low and slow, and it's just an amazing visual tool. And to go and see places in a way that, from a perspective that's never been done before was really exciting. And I was hooked. And this is typical of the lakes. I found it in the world's deserts. They have fresh water leaking out into the lake. So the lake here is hypersaline. It's saltier than seawater. But if you were to walk through that palm forest, date palms, you would find that you could drink fresh water out of your footsteps because it's all leaking out of a huge subterranean aquifer that underlies much of the Sahara. And those are big fingers of sand that are getting pushed in by the seasonal winds. And these little islands were used as a refuge by the locals when they came under attack. To travel in this way, it's not easy or cheap. It cost me about $1,000 a day to be in the field for the cars and the fuel and the excess baggage and everything. But what it lets me see, to me, is priceless. It's the person in the yellow parachute is my other flying buddy, Alain, who is the world champion of motorized paragliding. And this is Alain, a rare morning to sleep in. We usually get up about an hour before sunrise and have a coffee and get our motors ready and take off when the wind's really calm at dawn. And then we drive all day and try and fly again in the afternoon and then have some bad food and go to sleep. And this morning there was a sandstorm, so he got to sleep in. This is a luxury for him. Looks like misery to most, but for Alain, this is super deluxe. And that's Alain flying over a rare gap in the mountains of the Sahara where you have big streams of sand blowing through. So when I got to the end of the trip, I was really stunned by what I had seen. I thought, well, it would be amazing if I could take this same crazy flying machine to other parts of the world. I hadn't seen. I mean, I knew it was uniquely suited to deserts, so I wanted to explore other deserts. In the deserts, you can, I can take off and land anywhere, and I can have vehicle support because you can drive through the open country quite well. And so I thought, would it be interesting to go and check out all the other world's extreme deserts, these lunar-like environments? So I did a little research, and this is a map of all the world's extreme deserts. The driest areas are the ones in kind of brick red, and those areas get less than 10 centimeters of annual precipitation. And I'm not into that for the geek factor, but when you get out to these places, it looks like you're on a different planet. There's almost totally devoid of life. Some of these places have never had any rain in recorded history, but you still have people living in parts of them and animals that are able to eke out an existence. And I became fascinated by this life in extreme. And so I decided I wanted to go and check them all out. And I didn't realize it would take me 15 years. It was kind of, for me, it was a bit like a video game where you get to you survive one thing and then you say, oh, I'll go on to the next one, and the next level is even harder, and then the next one's even harder. When I was working in the Sahara, I heard about an area in China that had the tallest sand dunes in the world, and they were interspersed with lakes, and I thought, oh, that'd be cool. Unfortunately, it was downwind from the Chinese military rocket range. And so to get in there, I had to have a special permit from the Chinese military. And so I used my degree from Stanford to say that I was a scientist, and I mounted a scientific expedition into the Gobi. And we had 30 camels and 10 horses, And that's me in the blue jumpsuit in Atlanta, the world champions in that hideous pink jumpsuit. And then a couple of Chinese scientists were my co-investigators. As our ruse was that we were looking at how the desert was encroaching on agricultural lands. And we saw some really cool stuff. This is an ancient Buddhist monastery, and there was only one monk left. And the monastery used to be, when he was a boy, there were 30. And doing prayers by himself. During the Cultural Revolution, he hid all the sacred Tibetan Buddhist scrolls into the sand dunes and said that he took a wife and said the monastery was just his home. And this, most of the people we found out in this lake dune area in the Gobi were older people. Most of their kids, when they went to college or went to school, they never wanted to come back because life is very hard out in the desert. She was making us some tea, and there was nothing really to burn, so she used an old satellite dish covered in broken pieces of mirror to boil water. And I'm one of these guys who's always kind of pushing the envelope, and I ran out of gas that one morning, and so I called the camel guys on the radio, and they came pick me up. When you have 30 camels, you take advantage of them. And one of my scientific counterpart, Dr. Dong Zibao, he had developed this method for protecting roads from encroaching sand. And they have that little blue house is a pump house, and there's a person who lives there, and their job is to go out by bicycle and check the drip irrigation system. This is leading to one of the big Chinese oil fields in the Taklamakan Desert. And pepper's out to dry in the Taklamakan. Sometimes you're driving along and you see, looking at the road and kind of boring in a long hot day, and I say, oh, those piles of red peppers, that could be good from the air. And you go up and you discover patterns that you really could never quite imagine. And couldn't quite imagine that I was going to have a crash takeoff. I was taking off in China, and the world champion, I think he set up my wing wrong, and I would take off on a dry bed, and as soon as I took off, the glider banked into a big row of trees, and I woke up unconscious on the ground and got my face sewn up that morning. But I went flying the next day. This is the cotton harvest in China. They don't have to cover it because it never rains there. The water comes out of the Tian Shan Mountains, which are glaciated, but they drain down into the desert. And then after the Gobi, I thought, geez, it'd be really cool to go to the empty quarter of Arabia. I remember reading Thesiger's book, Arabian Sands, and I thought that'd be a really fascinating desert. It's also the world's largest sea of sand, the largest continuous expanse of sand in the world. It's bigger than France, Holland, and Belgium combined. And these are maps of all the people who crossed them. The red lines is my route. I made 2 trips across the empty quarter, and we were the fourth documented group to cross the sands. Thomas was the first to cross in the 30s. And there is no permanent there's no permanent points of habitation, no sources of water out there. It's probably the hottest place on Earth, but there's no one out there with a thermometer. And this is a view of the empty quarter at sunrise on a rare foggy morning. You get this low-lying fog. It lasted for about 5 minutes in the sun, and it disappeared. Very rare winter phenomena. But I felt like I was like on Mars. And crossing the empty quarter is a very hazardous operation. We couldn't find any guides who had ever been out there, so we used satellite photos and some old maps from the USGS. They did a survey of the empty quarter in the 1950s trying to help the Saudis find oil. And oddly enough, we found that the dunes hadn't moved at all. There are rows and rows of dunes, and you can't really drive over these dunes. You have to look for little gaps in them. And there's no water out there, and the only fuel we get was from Saudi border posts. And this is one of the USGS maps of the empty quarter, and that little ink drawing, that's our route through the sand. So the pink are mud flats, and the khaki colored are the dunes. The dunes are about 600 feet tall. And so we had to wind our way very carefully, and I had to mark our path, not out of geekness, but out of necessity, because I had to find the shortest route through and calculate, do we have enough fuel? Because if you run out of fuel out there, there's really nobody to come and get you. Somebody gave us a satellite phone, but it was out of credit, and the radios we had couldn't contact the Saudi military, so we were very much on our own out there. And I used the paraglider. It was very helpful for navigating, for finding ways through the dunes. and the glider would fit in the back of one of those 4x4s. Typically, we'll go out with a Jeep for people, one for, and a pickup for gear and water, and then a second one for camping stuff and food. And this is me playing navigator. And the tracks we found, I believe, are from the USGS survey that went up through there about 40 years before us. Extremely sterile environment. I contacted people at NASA, and they gave me access to some Landsat data, and I used that for trying to find interesting things to photograph. And I was curious about this big blue blob, and we got out there. It turned out it was an old Aramco well that had kind of gotten out of control, was spewing salty water, sulfurous water, out onto the sands. And I thought that would be interesting to check out. And I also wanted to look at this little feature. I thought that'd be a nice feature. So we went out there and checked it out. It's very odd to be sitting like in a suburban house and say, geez, that looks like an interesting wiggle of sand. And then a month later, you're flying over it. And those are two of our expedition cars for a sense of scale. And we found just a lot of weird stuff. I mean, these are kinds of dunes that I found, and I really haven't seen any of these ever documented from the air before. It's a very rare kind of a barcan dune. They turn into little dots, but it looks to me like jellyfish spawning. It's in Yemen. And this in Oman. These are camels going out to graze in the morning. When I took this photo, the guy who owned the camels was he was threatening to shoot me down because he said I was disturbing his camels. But in Oman, we had to have a military escort because this is after 9/11, and they were worried about gun smuggling. So we had two Omani technicals with us with big 50 caliber machine guns, and so I didn't think the guy would actually shoot at me. This is a wildlife area in Oman where they're, in the Emirates, and they're bringing back sand gazelles. They were hunted almost into extinction. And even in the most sterile, forbidding environments, you still find life that can survive out there in the very limits of the possible. After exploring the exotic deserts of the Middle East, I wanted to look at something a little more close to home, and I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I decided to make a trip down to the Sonora Desert. This is in Baja California, which is also a hyper-arid desert. And in about halfway down Baja, there's a lagoon on the Pacific side, where it's the primary breeding and calf raising place for California gray whales. And this is a California juvenile gray whale skull on the beach. Been propped up by some tourists having a picnic. But you still find huge expanses of unpopulated desert right on the coast. I mean, it's like resort perfect and nobody there. Also no water. This is the Gulf of California, where the Colorado River meets the sea. And it's very sad to me. This used to be one of the richest wetlands in North America. And now the Colorado really never has any fresh water crossing the border. And so it's a sandy desert, and it's racked by 30-foot tides, almost totally sterile. Even it's all been overfished, and so even in the water, there's hardly anything alive until it rains, and then the sands explode. There's seeds in the sand, and when you get a rare hurricane coming up the coast, it'll explode into bloom like this. And there are some islands in the Gulf of California that are a bit like the Galapagos, in that they have incredible diversity of birds and terrestrial wildlife as well. And this is a tern species. And this is the only island in the world where they breed. And I wanted to photograph megafauna too, and to photograph wildlife. The easiest way is to go to a point of water and wait for them. I went at the hottest, driest time of year, which down there is in late June, and I set up a remote-controlled camera. Sometimes the best tool is not from the sky, and I'm interested in taking pictures. And to me, my flying machine it's a means to an end. I'm not just like the adventure dude. I'm there to get a picture. And here I had to wait 3 weeks in a blind, and my blind was way down the canyon, and I had a remote-controlled camera on a tripod with a video feed off the eyepiece. And so I saw this in a sweltering tent 300 meters away. There's a bighorn sheep coming down to drink. And I also wanted to photograph mountain lions, and I set up a camera trap, a little infrared beam of light going across, like kind of like this little beam, kind of going right across the water line, and everything that came down to this water hole to drink took its own picture. It was like a little photo booth, and this is me testing out the photo booth. And we spent 3 weeks taking out this water hole. And we got porcupines and owls and peccaries. But what I was really after was the rarest of all, which is the mountain lion, the desert mountain lion. And you can see how emaciated she is. This is in the depth of the dry season, and even usually the mountain lions will get all the water they need from their kills. But at this time of year, she had to come down and drink, and they're very nocturnal, and everything that she was hunting was nocturnal. So she was staking out the water hole too. And she didn't like the flash. She was trying to figure out where it came from. And then she figured it out. But I'm kind of a glutton for punishment, and one of the places I always wanted to go when I was a hitchhiker was Libya. And I got contacted by email by this crazy Moroccan pilot who'd been flying in Libya, and we started corresponding, and he offered to smuggle my aircraft into Libya, which is how he had gotten in. And I finagled Libya. This is obviously when Gaddafi was in power, and so we smuggled it. We got it to the border. He took it to the border. He told them that it was a generator, and that my wing was a tent. And these guys were kind of bored, and they let it go. And then I flew in and met him down in the desert, and then we had to do a little of assembly. I just want to show you how my aircraft goes together. So after we went through all the hassle of getting to Libya, we went out and explored. We found some really amazing things. This is a volcano that erupted out in the middle of the Libyan desert, and it came up and hit this underground aquifer that you saw about 20 pictures ago, and it exploded. It had a big steam explosion and spewed volcanic debris about a 10-mile radius all around the desert. And if you looked at it in Google Earth, it would look like somebody stubbed a cigarette out in a stucco wall, and you see this big stream of black ash blown by the wind. And these ripples you see here are caused by wind blowing in this direction. It's a very rare phenomenon. Usually dunes line up parallel to the wind, but here with the kind of volcanic ash, they're perpendicular. It's very, very odd. The lake there is all is hypersaline. It's saltier than seawater, as is this lake, same aquifer. And you just find just weird stuff out there. It's just, to me, it looked like this is an area near the Algerian border. It looked like a bed of nails. And it's one of our expedition cars out there for a sense of scale in the lower right. And this is the great Erg of Merzouk. Just beautiful patterns out there. It's, I love this stuff. And this is in Algeria, also not an easy country to travel in these days. This is the ancient city of Gardaya, and it's a very pious Muslim city. It's forbidden to take pictures inside the city. You walk along and you have to have a guide with you to make sure you don't pull out a camera and try and get pictures of one of the covered ladies. But from the air, there was no control, and we actually got a permit. And what's really cool is you can look down, you can see all the roofs. It's very hot there, and so they sleep in these little private roof, kind of walled off roof spaces, little patios, and they dry their laundry out there and sleep out there at night in the hot nights. And the only way you could ever see them was from the air. That's the upper left is the marketplace. And from there, you can also see how they grow their food. This is a dune field that had been turned into an agricultural plot. They built little fences on the top of the dunes to try and stabilize the sand. and then they grow palm trees. The water is very shallow, but it's just you have to stabilize the dunes so they don't get overrun by sand. It's an abandoned city in the middle of the Algerian Sahara. Never seen it photographed before. And to get water out there for agriculture, the people are very creative. They have a system of underground aqueducts, and these to me it looks like the world after it got attacked by a sewing machine, but these are little manholes used to clean out the subterranean aqueducts. And so somebody dug a well about 10 miles out of town, and then they found the water, the ground was sloping very gently down towards the village, and they let the water flow with gravity. And every 10 years or so, somebody has to go down the hole and clean it out, kind of like cleaning the plaque off your teeth, because the cavity will get mineralized. And to get down there, you have to take off your shoes and literally like dig your toenails into the stone, because these little teeny, like little toe-sized holes to go down. And then you find this poor guy who's got the job of cleaning out the kanat. It's very hard to find people who do this now. The young people all want to play with their iPhones and watch movies, and it's only the old guys who will still do this hard work. But it provides a continual source of water without any pumps. It's a really ancient system that works. And when you're born in the Sahara, your family would inherit the little bit of water that flows between those two stones. And you don't inherit land because you can grow food anywhere you have water. The water is the valuable commodity. And this is a sand break they've created to try and stop the oasis from getting taken over by blowing sand. We had to wait about a week in this village to fly because we had a lot of wind. And finally when we took off, I was flying around thinking, feeling quite happy. Finally, got rewarded for our patience. And then while we were flying, I looked down and I saw that there were a couple of police cars following us, and we didn't have permit to fly in this part of Algeria. And I was very worried about getting arrested and what was going to happen to our crew. So I raided the crew and I told them to meet us in this. That's one of our expedition vehicles right there. And so we went up really, Francois and I went up really high, and we split, and we went about 2 miles away from each other, and then we spiraled down to the ground, and we flew at treetop level and landed there at sunset, evaded the police, and we jumped threw everything in the car, and we escaped across the desert, and we were going to drive 20 miles to the nearest paved road. And because we were trying to escape the police, we had to drive with our lights off on a moonless night. And we were feeling really smart. We evaded the cops and bouncing along in the car, and then we went off a cliff. And we hit the bottom of the cliff so hard that we were in the back seat, the seats came off the floor, and all the gear came down on top of us. And there's no 911, you can't go to the cops. And so we had 2 cars, one of them was stuffed, and we had to figure out how to get out. And so we dug, and we got every rock we could find for about a mile and piled it up underneath the back tires with the wheels, and then we started to push and push and push. And miracle of miracles, it started. I love Toyotas. And most people don't realize it, but deserts are, they're not just in hot places, they're also in cold places. This is the highest point in Bolivia, Mount Sahama. It's about 21,000 feet high, and it's permanently glaciated. I went up there with a team that was trying to get glacial records to look at climate change, and I had to camp out there for 3 nights, and at sunrise, the shadow was projected out in the atmosphere, and I thought, geez, that's pretty cool, but what would really be nice is to go up on that volcano and look at that one. So 10 years later, I went back, and I want you to look at the snow line right here. And the snow is retreating really rapidly in the Andes. And so that's from, this view is from, the next one is from there, looking at that one. Look at the difference in the snow line. And the snow, it doesn't even melt, it sublimates, it turns directly from ice into vapor. And you get this kind of spiky ice. It's very rare. It's typical of the places that are rapidly evaporating in the Andes and the Himalaya. You also find it on Mount Kilimanjaro. And the cultures are disappearing in the deserts too. This is a village of people who spoke a pre-Inca language, and only about 2,000 Chipaya speakers left when I was there. They have their native dress and their native tongue, and if they can, once they graduate from high school, they usually go off to Chile to get a job. It's a political rally in Bolivia, and this is still, it's a hyper-arid desert. It looks, it's very Andean, but it's desert. Less than 10 centimeters of rain. This is the Salar de Uyuni. It's the world's largest salt flat. alternate landing spot for the space shuttle. It's about 80 miles by 50 miles of pure white edible sand. Sorry, edible salt, not edible sand, sorry. And to fly up here was really tough. The lowest point in the altiplano was about 12,000 feet, so I needed a supersized wing and the most powerful foot-launchable motor made. And this is one of my friends, a Swiss pilot who was testing out my new wing. And we was trying to take off. We didn't know if it would work. Nobody had ever taken off from that altitude before with a foot-launched motor. And you got to run and run and run and run and then pull, and then you get amazing views. These are expedition cars going across the Salar. It was there have been in the springtime. You get water leaking out of the aquifers, and it comes onto the edges of the lakes and floods them. About 6 inches of water. And these are vicuña. They were almost hunted into extinction, but they're making a comeback. Their wool was used by the Inca royalty. Very hard to find them except from the air. And this is coming in for a night landing in the Salar. And so it's another point of the Salar. They have cacti much like the saguaros in the southwest United States. And there's a lot of wildlife down there. Most spectacular were the flamingos. These are James flamingo. They only breed on this one lake in the Andes, and it's colored orange by the volcanic waters that feed on algae that they feed on. And deserts are also the coldest environment on Earth in Antarctica. Most of Antarctica is a hyper-arid desert. It just never melts. Most people, when they go to Antarctica, they go to the peninsula, which is kind of like going to the Alaskan Peninsula. To me, that's not really, it's not, I don't know how to put it down, it's not quite the real Alaska. Most people, when they go to Antarctica, don't even go to the Antarctic, they go to the peninsula that sticks out of the Antarctic, and this is near McMurdo, and I had to do cold weather training to go out with the National Science Foundation scientists who were trying to understand climate change there. And that's Mount Erebus. It's the one of 3 molten lava lakes in the world, and it's up on top of that volcano in the back. And this is a glacier coming out. This is taken over the Ross Sea by helicopter. It was too cold there for me to fly my aircraft. And this is Mount Erebus looking down from the helicopter. It's about 12,000 feet. And inside all that steam is a lava lake. And this is a geothermal vent on the flanks of Erebus. He's standing over a cave. We were very lucky we didn't fall through. And inside the cave. And in the Antarctic, you also have sand dunes. This is in the dry valleys. It's the largest ice-free area in the Antarctic. And ephemeral lakes in the dry valleys with permafrost. And this is the Ross Sea with the beach, all covered in permafrost. And so you have deserts in the highest and coldest places, and also this is the lowest. This is the Dead Sea on the Jordanian side. That's Israel in the background. And the Dead Sea is dropping by about 1 meter a year, and all the water that used to flow into it is being used by humans for agriculture and drinking water. And so this is an old dock on the Israeli side, and they built it about 10 years ago, and it doesn't really work so well anymore. And when I got to the Dead Sea, I realized that these desert environments, they're beautiful to me, and it was a great place to explore and have my adventures, but I saw how fragile they were, and how we're overusing the resource, particularly water. And this is the shore of the Dead Sea, and we're using so much water that the groundwater comes in and it dissolves the salt layers above it, and you get these big collapses, these sinkholes. They're beautiful, covered in colored algae, but they're it's the sign of a dying ecosystem. I mean, it used to be, this was the Garden of Eden, and now it's this kind of a sterile salt wasteland that's being used to make phosphates for fertilizer. And there's an artificial resort on the Israeli side, but they had to truck in sand to have a beach for the tourists. This is the nude beach, the women's section. I got arrested for taking this photo. And Masada, the Jewish redoubt. Romans tried to take Masada. They took Masada by building a ramp up here, and when they got to the top, everybody committed suicide. And this is Makara, which was King Herod's temple. It's hard to believe that this was, again, once a very fertile land that supported thousands and thousands of people, but it's been, overgrazed and overfarmed, and now there's no topsoil left. And I just saw that, these are desert environments. If you don't take care of them, this is what you have. You go from the Garden of Eden to this. And I found it very sad, and it made me realize that these desert environments are really in need of protection. They're not biologically wealthy, but they're biologically very fragile and exquisitely beautiful. This is from the Jordanian side of the Dead Sea. This is the last picture I'll show you tonight, and I'm happy to take any questions anyone has.